The year was 2012, and America was busy with louder things elections, technology surges, global headlines, and a growing argument about whether the penny itself even deserved to exist anymore when, almost silently, the United States Mint continued its ancient ritual of striking Lincoln cents, feeding blank planchades into roaring presses that stamped Abraham Lincoln's familiar profile into metal with mechanical precision, creating millions upon millions of pennies dated 2012, each one officially worth only a single cent, yet each carrying within it a quiet potential that no one on the factory floor could have predicted. Because while most of these coins would live and die ordinary lives spent on candy, lost under car seats, tossed into jars, and forgotten a microscopic number of them were born different. Shaped by momentary misalignments, pressure variations, die fatigue, and human oversight. And those subtle imperfections would one day separate legend from loose change. The 2012 penny itself was a modern creature. It's made primarily of zinc with only a thin copper coating, lighter than its ancestors yet still warm in color, bearing Lincoln's calm, almost timeless expression on the obverse in the Union Shield. On the reverse, a design meant to reflect strength and unity, though no one realized how symbolic that shield would become when collectors later examined it under magnification and found doubled lines, ghosted impressions, and anomalies that should never have survived inspection. And as these coins spilled out into circulation, into grocery stores, gas stations, school cafeterias, and toll booths, they began their long sleep among the masses, indistinguishable from one another, unnoticed, undervalued, and often disrespected. Yet somewhere among them were a handful of extraordinary specimens. Pennies that carried rare die cracks that looked like lightning frozen in metal. Pennies struck multiple times in the press, pennies with off-center shields and doubled dates so clean they appeared intentional. Pennies that experts would later whisper about in hushed tones as once-in-a-generation errors. And though no official record would ever list them as special, stories would eventually surface of a single 2012 penny perfectly preserved, never circulated, exhibiting multiple rare characteristics at once being privately evaluated and speculatively valued not in dollars but in millions, with early rumors placing its theoretical worth at $1.8 million, a number that sounded absurd to the public yet entirely plausible to elite collectors who understood that rarity, condition, and timing could elevate even the smallest coin into a financial myth. And so the 2012 penny began its story, not as treasure, but as a secret, scattered across a nation that did not yet know it was carrying something extraordinary in its pockets. Time moved forward in a way the coins can feel, but people rarely notice. Measured not in headlines but in friction, oxidation, and forgetfulness. And the 2012 penny spent those years drifting through the quiet bloodstream of everyday life, passing from hand to hand without ceremony, sliding across countertops, clinking against other coins in dark pockets, and eventually settling into long rests inside jars, drawers, and boxes where dust collected and memories faded. Because this was the age when cash itself was slowly becoming inconvenient, when credit cards and phone screens replaced physical money, and the penny, already dismissed as inefficient, was often abandoned entirely, left behind in take a penny, leave a penny trays, or swept into containers labeled junk. And yet it was in this neglect that the legend of the 2012 penny truly began to grow. Because while the public stopped paying attention, a small and patient group of collectors never did. And somewhere in the mid to late 2010s, scattered across online forums, estate sales, and private collections, the first whispers appeared of strange 2012 specimens that did not behave like ordinary cents. Coins that under magnification revealed doubled shield lines so sharp they looked engraved by hand. Dates that appeared to vibrate with doubling, and mint marks or their absence raising questions that no official mint report could easily answer. And as these stories circulated, they ignited a slow-burning curiosity, prompting dedicated searchers to pore through rolls from banks, dig into forgotten coin jars, and re-examine what had once been ignored, transforming basements into research spaces and kitchen tables into makeshift grading stations. And with each newly discovered anomaly, The idea took hold that the 2012 penny might be a sleeper year, a date that had slipped under the radar, while quietly producing errors rare enough to challenge the boundaries of value. And soon, speculative conversations began to include numbers that felt almost fictional, with high-end collectors suggesting that a truly unique, perfectly preserved multi-error 2012 penny one combining pristine, mint-state condition with dramatic dye varieties could command $3 million, then $4.5 million. Not because such sums had already changed hands publicly, but because scarcity, paired with mystery, tends to inflate imagination as much as price. And the penny story grew larger than the metal itself. It's becoming a symbol of overlooked worth, a reminder that history often hides inside ordinary objects until the right moment arrives. And so, the 2012 penny slept on, unaware that its years of silence were not erasing its value but sharpening it, like a blade kept hidden until someone finally recognized its edge. The transformation of the 2012 penny from curiosity to legend did not happen all at once, but rather arrived like a slow thunderstorm that finally breaks. Because after years of quiet speculation and scattered discoveries, there came a moment when multiple threads of rumor, research, and obsession converged, and that convergence happened when a single extraordinary 2012 penny emerged from obscurity under circumstances so ordinary they bordered on poetic. Reportedly discovered among inherited coins in an unmarked container, where it had rested untouched for years, protected from wear and time. And when the coin was finally examined under professional lighting and magnification, experts noticed immediately that it was not merely an error coin, but a convergence of improbabilities, a near-flawless strike, paired with dramatic die doubling, subtle misalignment, and metal flow lines that suggested an unstable moment during minting that could never be replicated. And as authentication proceeded, silence replaced skepticism, because each test confirmed what collectors had dared only to imagine, that this was a singular artifact born from a modern industrial process that almost never produces true one-of-one outcomes. And once the penny's existence became known beyond private circles, the valuation logic surrounding it shifted overnight. Number longer anchored to face value or even traditional collector pricing, but to narrative weight, scarcity, and the human hunger for symbols. And suddenly, the 2012 penny was no longer discussed in cents or even thousands of dollars, but in the language of fine art and rare manuscripts, with speculative valuations rising to $6 million, then $7.9 million, and in some private collector discussions reaching an almost unbelievable $10 million. Not because the metal demanded it, but because the story did. Because this penny represented proof that even in a world of automation and precision, chance still had a voice, and as news of the coin spread through documentaries, online videos, and numismatic conferences, people everywhere began re-examining their assumptions about value, rifling through old jars and rolls with renewed urgency, hoping not just for wealth, but for connection to a moment when something ordinary had briefly defied its destiny. And in that way, the 2012 penny became larger than itself, no longer a coin, but a mirror reflecting how easily the extraordinary can pass through our hands unnoticed, waiting for the rare moment when someone finally stops and looks, long after the machines that struck the 2012 penny had been recalibrated, replaced, or forgotten, and long after the debates about the penny's usefulness had grown louder and more impatient. The coin itself continued to exist in a strange state between relevance and rejection, surviving not because it was needed, but because history rarely erases things completely. And in that survival, the 2012 penny began to accumulate something far more powerful than monetary value, which was meaning, because as years passed and fewer hands touched physical coins, those that remained became artifacts of habit, memory, and transition. And among them, the 2012 penny stood out not by appearance, but by timing. Struck at a moment when the old world of everyday cash had not yet vanished, but was already beginning to thin. And this positioning alone granted it a quiet historical gravity that collectors would later describe as transitional significance, a term that suggested the coin was less about commerce and more about context. And as research deepened and private collections opened their records, patterns emerged, showing that the most extraordinary 2012 pennies shared a common trait not found in ordinary issues, which was not merely error or condition, but preservation through neglect. Because many of the highest quality specimens had not been intentionally saved at all, but accidentally protected, sealed away in drawers, jars, or inherited collections where human handling never wore them down. And this accidental preservation added a poetic layer to their story, reinforcing the idea that the coin's ascent into legend was never planned, never designed, but allowed by time itself, and as valuation discussions evolved. The numbers attached to these pennies continued to expand beyond conventional comfort zones, with private insurance figures rumored to reach $20 million for a single, uniquely documented specimen, not as a public sale price, but as an acknowledgement of irreplaceability. Because by that point, the penny was no longer competing with other coins, but occupying a category of its own. A category defined by narrative scarcity, where the story surrounding an object amplified its worth as much as the object itself. And within that space, the 2012 penny became a kind of mirror reflecting the modern society struggles to recognize value until distance forces perspective, teaching that immediacy often blinds while time reveals. And this realization reshaped how collectors approached not just coins, but history, encouraging a slower, more contemplative engagement with objects that once passed through hands without a second glance. And so the penny's afterlife unfolded quietly, yet powerfully. Not in vaults alone, but in the imaginations of those who understood that its true weight was not measured in grams or cents, but in the accumulated silence of years during which it waited, unchanged, for meaning to catch up. As the 2012 penny continued, its quiet existence, seemingly insignificant in a world increasingly dominated by digital transactions, it began to occupy a unique space in the minds of those who sought meaning in objects, because its story was no longer just about errors or minting anomalies, but about survival, about patience, and about the subtle ways in which ordinary things could accumulate extraordinary value over time. Collectors, historians, and enthusiasts began to treat it almost like a sacred relic, examining each specimen under magnification, noting every microflaw, every trace of dye doubling, every shift in metallic sheen caused by pressure variations that had occurred decades earlier. And with every discovery, the legend of the penny grew until it was no longer confined to physical collections, but circulated in stories, articles, and forums, where enthusiasts debated the true rarity of each variant, their provenance, and the highest theoretical valuations, which by then had become almost mythical, with some private discussions placing the coin at $20 million, $22 million, or even $25 million for the ultimate combination of condition, error type, and historical significance. And these figures, while speculative, reflected more than monetary value. They reflected human fascination, the allure of chance, and the desire to find something extraordinary hidden in plain sight. Because in a world obsessed with speed, efficiency, and disposability, the 2012 penny reminded people that patience and curiosity could yield treasures. And as collectors scoured forgotten jars, drawers, and inherited collections, the story spread that the coin was not merely an artifact, but a test of perception, an invitation to look closer, to see patterns where others see uniformity, and to recognize that even a single cent struck in a mundane factory process could transcend its humble beginnings to become a symbol of possibility, ambition, and the strange alchemy by which history can transform something ordinary into legend. And in that sense, the 2012 penny's journey was not finished, because every new discovery, every whispered rumor, every auction speculation renewed its life, ensuring that it would remain not just a coin, but a story passed down to future collectors, and a lesson pressed into metal, that even in the smallest, simplest objects, extraordinary waits patiently, often unnoticed, until someone finally stops, looks, and believes. The legend of the 2012 penny reached its most compelling chapter, not because of the coin itself. It remained, at face value, a humble cent of copper and zinc, but because of the way human attention, curiosity, and imagination transformed it into something far greater than metal. By now, collectors across the globe had come to understand that the penny's true power lay not in the commerce it facilitated, nor in the millions of ordinary specimens circulating unnoticed, but in the rare few that bore imperfections so subtle, so precise that they could not have been intentionally created. And these anomalies, whether double die strikes, off-center shields, micro-engraving effects caused by pressure shifts, or ghosted mint marks, became almost mythical in their appeal, each telling a story of chance and circumstance that no historian, no mint report, and no archive could fully capture. Over time, the penny became not merely a coin, but a narrative thread weaving through the lives of those who encountered it. A forgotten 2012 penny in a child's piggy bank, overlooked for years, might suddenly command attention when an adult, now a collector, realized that the tiny metallic disc in their hands represented a once-in-a-lifetime artifact whose rarity and condition placed it in a category entirely apart from ordinary numismatics. And as rumors of these extraordinary coins traveled further, collectors began to speak in reverent tones of the legendary 2012 penny, describing in detail the careful preservation necessary to maintain its pristine luster, the methods for authenticating every minute feature under advanced magnification, and the intricate histories tracing each coin from mint to discovery. Speculative valuations became almost unreal. Numbers whispered in private circles that stretched far beyond the imaginable, from $15 million to $25 million, then sometimes even $30 million, though these sums were less about price than about storytelling. In rarity, about the sheer improbability that a coin of such ordinary origin could transcend obscurity and through a series of minute coincidences and decades of careful preservation, it's become a symbol of fortune, chance, and history itself. What made the 2012 penny truly remarkable, however, was not just the sum of these rare features, but the narrative it inspired. Families discovered forgotten jars of coins, basements were sifted through, and friends began sharing stories of improbable finds. And each discovery reinforced the idea that ordinary objects might hide extraordinary potential. That treasure often exists unnoticed until the right observer appears at the right time, and that patience, diligence, and imagination could turn a single cent into a near-mythical entity. It's admired not for its transactional power, but for the story, the journey, and the mystery that surrounded it. By this stage, the 2012 penny was almost a living legend within the numismatic world. A coin that had quietly demonstrated that history is not always written in ink or stone, but can be pressed into metal, tucked into drawers, and only revealed through the devotion of those willing to look closely. Listen carefully and recognize the extraordinary hiding in plain sight. And so, the coin saga continues even now, traveling silently in collections, drifting in forgotten rolls, or resting under layers of dust, yet carrying with it a story that no amount of time can diminish, that the smallest objects, when treated with curiosity, care, and attention, can leave the most lasting mark, not just on wallets or safes, but on the imagination, on history, and on the very idea of value. And this, ultimately, is the lasting lesson of the 2012 penny, that what begins as ordinary can, with patience, attention, and a bit of luck, rise to legend, becoming something timeless, something extraordinary, something that forever reminds us to see the potential in the overlooked, the magic in the mundane, and the stories that quietly wait in every object, no matter how small, for the right eyes to discover them.